What's up, everybody? This is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga, here to bring you another video with no frills, just the analysis. And today I'm here to bring you the review of Game of Thrones Season 4, Episode 1, entitled Two Swords. And first, let me just start off by saying, welcome to my first ever Game of Thrones episode review. So, hopefully, this is the start of something great. And to everybody who's just being introduced to my channel, make sure you subscribe, check out all my other videos, and like I said, hopefully this is the start of something great. Just as a prelude to this review, let me just say a couple of things. First, I found out about the Game of Thrones quite a while ago. I'm actually a pretty avid reader of science fiction and fantasy, so I knew about the Game of Thrones series at least since 2008, the summer of 2008, although I never decided to read any of the books simply because I really don't invest my money in series that are not complete, especially when those series, well, except for Brandon Sanderson, because I gotta get the Stormlight Archive. That's pretty much the only new series or ongoing series that I actually buy each book that comes out. Of course, I got that new Words of Radiance. But besides that, I don't really invest my money in new series, especially if it takes the author about 5 years to write a book. Just don't do that. And since I also dropped The Walking Dead, that show, I decided I had some space that needed to be filled up with a series, so I decided to take on Game of Thrones. So with that being said, let's jump right into the summary and analysis of this episode. So I have a lot to talk about. Alright, first, the Starks are pretty much dead. And I mean that in the sense that a lot of the family members are dead. A lot of the important family members are dead. But also in terms of, as a major power, in terms of the Starks being a major power, they're dead. It's pretty much over for the Starks. Robb, Catelyn, Ned, all dead. Sansa, she might as well be dead because she's just a political hostage and she's basically useless. And Arya isn't doing shit. She's really not. She won't be doing shit either. At least that's my impression of what's going on. I don't really expect too much from her. Bran, although he'll probably be instrumental in some way in fighting against the invasion of the White Walkers, he probably won't be doing shit in terms of gaining any sort of political power anytime soon. And Jon Snow is not a real Stark because, remember, he's a bastard. And the death of the Stark family, both in terms of the members and in terms of them being a major political power, was very aptly symbolized in the opening scene of this episode when Tywin had ice, the Valyrian steel sword of the Stark family, pretty much melted down and then reforged into two other swords that are now the Lannisters. So that's pretty much it for the Starks. And we know that the swords, especially Valyrian steel swords, are not just symbols of military and political power, but oftentimes in fiction, especially in epic fantasy, and the Game of Thrones is really an epic fantasy series, the swords represent and symbolize patriarchy and especially patrilinearity. As we saw throughout the series, ice was handed down from the patriarch Ned Stark to Robb Stark after Ned Stark's death. And now after Robb Stark is dead, now it's handed on to Tywin Lannister, who is the patriarch of the Lannister family. So that pretty much lets you know that that sword that represents not just military power, not just political power, but is also a phallic symbol. And that's another important thing. A phallic symbol of patriarchy and patrilinearity pretty much epitomizes the destruction, or rather the end of the Stark family. That's just the way it is. So, like I said, Tywin had ice melted down and reforged in order to symbolize the sort of strengthening, the bringing together, the gathering of the Lannisters' political power throughout Westeros. And another thing, as a quick aside, I was actually pretty surprised to see that Valyrian steel could be melted down and reforged. I didn't know that. I'm not sure if this is the first time that that was mentioned, or if this was alluded to, but I actually didn't know that that could be done. So I was quite surprised to see that, given how unique Valyrian steel is supposed to be. And given the fact that no one can make any new Valyrian steel. Now, let me talk about Arya. And just in relation to what I just said about the Starks being dead as a major political power and as a major political family. If you have or had any illusions that Arya will get any sort of revenge for her family, you should really get that out of your head right now. And this isn't based on any knowledge I have of the books, because like I said, I haven't read the books. But she's a child. She doesn't have any power. She can't really fend for herself. She can't fight for herself. She can't really look after herself. I mean, of course, she's gotten lucky throughout the series and she's managed to stay alive. But staying alive isn't really evidence that you have any sort of political power whatsoever. Because she doesn't. She doesn't have any political power. She has no authority, really no standing in Westeros, especially since Robb Stark's army has been decimated after the Red Wedding. And even if she did, who would follow a child? Especially a girl. In Westeros? No. Just absolutely not happening. Arya's entire plot line, as far as I can tell, up to this point, and even into the near future, probably the foreseeable future, is just a bait and switch. Especially, and it was pretty much set up in this episode that it would be a bait and switch. And I say that because even though it's clear that she has no political power, she was still in this episode talking about how all the people that she intends to kill and all the revenge that she's going to seek because of the wrong that was done to her family. And stop. Not going to happen. Arya Stark is not going to take out Tywin Lannister. She's not going to take out the Lannisters. She's not going to take out Joffrey. Not going to freaking happen. Just not going to happen. And irrespective of anything else in the Game of Thrones, the abiding principle of the series and of the books is realism. And if we take realism as the premise of the narrative form of the series, then you can't possibly believe that Arya Stark will get any sort of revenge, realistically speaking. It's just not going to happen. Also, another thing about Arya Stark, and this is in relation to the revenge that she got on the torturer in this episode. I have to say that I was quite disturbed by Arya's sadism when she kills the torturer. And of course, I know that as the viewer, as the audience, we're supposed to feel a sense of poetic justice. And of course, I'm not saying that I have any compassion whatsoever for the torturer. It's not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is that my primary feeling in viewing that scene when Arya kills the torturer is one of disquiet at Arya's, just her continuation of the pathology of frenetic violence that has gripped this story and has really gripped the War of Westeros, the War of Five Kings. Arya Stark's sadistic And it's not just that she kills the torturer, but her sadistic killing of the torturer is just a continuation of this frenetic pathological violence. And that's also mostly because Arya, as most people probably forget, is really still just a child. She's still just a child. And for her to kill somebody with that sort of sadism, gotta say, is rather disturbing. I mean, of course, there are a lot of things in Game of Thrones that are disturbing. I'm not saying have a weak stomach, but I'm just saying that we should assess that scene with the proper perspective and sort of contextualize it. Now let me talk about Jaime and Cersei. We obviously knew that their relationship would be different, but I have to say, I didn't quite expect this. So let me talk about Jaime first, and then Cersei, and then their relationship to each other. First, Jaime. Despite being the Kingslayer, Jaime's sword hand was the foundation of his identity, and not just of his identity, but really of his manhood. And this comes out when Cersei says something to the effect of, "Everything you've lost what made you a man," or something to that effect. Can't quite remember what she said, but it was something along those lines, and that really makes it clear that Jaime's sword hand was really the foundation of not just his identity, but of his manhood. And this episode also makes pretty clear that even though he's lost his sword hand, he can't really do anything else. He can't really do anything else, and I'm not really sure if Jaime knows how to do anything else. It's not just that he can't, it's just that he doesn't know how to do anything else besides be a fighter, a warrior, a knight, a part of the King's Guard. And even when Tywin very pointedly asks Jaime what it is that he wants to do, Jaime, in of course his style, his whole aura, his whole personality, he just deflects. Talks about, "What I would like is supper." So he doesn't even answer the question. Just deflects. And even though he deflects on the question of what it is that he wants to do, it's pretty clear. I mean, we can infer through his actions that he really wants to retain his, I guess you could call it his glory as a knight, his glory as being a part of the King's Guard. And we can see that he pretty much doesn't want to accept his role in the system of primogeniture. He doesn't want to accept his role as the man of Casterly Rock, or someone who would take on that role in the future. And he flat out states that he doesn't want any titles or land or any of those things. He just wants to go back to being a knight and being a part of the King's Guard. And I must say that I'm pretty sure that Jaime's reluctance to take on his role in the system of primogeniture is based on his relationship with Tywin. And here's why I say that. On one hand, everything that Jaime is, he owes to his father. But on the other hand, we see that he has an extreme aversion to carrying on the Lannister name. And he really is refusing to inherit that position of being the patriarch and continuing along that line of patrilinearity. We see that. So we see a sort of ambivalence built into his character by virtue of the fact that his father has just lorded over him his entire life. So on one hand, everything that he is and even everything that he hopes to be is because of his father, even while he has an extreme aversion to his father. And I think that his reluctance in rejecting the Lannister name is in part because he wants to be his own man, even though he probably knows that's not possible for him. And I think that his reluctance the in accepting his role in carrying on the Lannister name is probably a psychological defense mechanism. That's where that probably comes from. And I might go so far as to say that in psychoanalytic terms, it's a reaction formation. I'm not quite sure about that, but I don't think I would be too far off base if I posited that that Jaime's response to Tywin is really a reaction formation. I don't think I would be going out on a limb if I said that. And this is also why I think that Jaime probably won't change in any significant way. I don't think he can change, honestly. I think that he's built up this image of himself in his own head to such an extent, and he's so obstinate about it, that I don't think it's possible for him to change in any significant way, especially with Tywin still alive, to put it bluntly. And also, I think it's very important to point this out because a lot of people who watch Jaime and watch his relationship with Brienne are probably making a mistake of confusing character development with character growth. And those two things are not necessarily the same thing. Growth generally implies some sort of positive transformation. That's what character growth means. But that's not necessarily what character development means. Sometimes you have a situation where a character appears to be going through some sort of growth, some sort of either revolutionary or evolutionary process. And at the end, we see them just completely regress. I mean, we saw, well, at least I did. A great example of this is in Joe Abercrombie's First Law trilogy, where all of his characters, except Glockton maybe, where all of his characters seem to be making some sort of growth, and then all of a sudden they just regress. Just go straight backwards. And sometimes characters don't grow at all. They just get progressively worse. Or sometimes they wind up exactly where they started. So even though I think people are perhaps hoping or perhaps are getting the sense that Jaime losing his sword hand is a perfect opportunity for him to finally crawl out from under Tywin's thumb and finally engage in some significant character growth, I think that your hopes may be misplaced. Just gonna put that out there. Now, let me talk about Cersei. She's still, obviously, she's still not intent on marrying Loras Tyrell. I mean, not Tyrell. Martell. Is it? Tyrell, I think. If I'm not mistaken. I can't remember if it was Martell, Tyrell, whatever. But you understand what I'm saying. And honestly, I can't see how she would possibly get out of this. I just don't see that happening, especially now that Big Daddy Tywin is back and he's the king's hand. Don't see how that's going to happen. The only thing I can see that leads up to to some sort of scenario where this doesn't happen is maybe now that Cersei seems to have discovered discovered the existence of Shay, maybe that will play into this plot line of how she's going to get out of marrying Loras. But other than that, I have no freaking clue. Just don't know. Uh, and like I said before, I thought her relationship with Jaime would obviously be different, but I wasn't quite expecting this. Her reaction to Jaime's return was really surprising to me. The way she just flat out rejected him and was angry at him. And I thought, excuse me, I thought she would really take Jaime back because I thought that she would seek some sort of solace in his companionship, especially given her unwanted arranged marriage. So I just thought that she would really go back to Jaime. But now it seems like, and of course, I mean, it's pretty difficult to find someone in this series who does not have some sort of serious psychological issues. Just putting that out there. It's really difficult to find somebody in this series who is not really scrambled in the head. But now it's clear that she's suffering from some severe abandonment issues, and that's easy to see why. Because Tywin's abuse and rejection as a father has really left Cersei ill-equipped to deal with any sort of loss or separation. That's why she's so pathologically obsessed with her children and with Joffrey. I mean, even though she knows that Joffrey is a psychopath, she just cannot help herself. She's using her children and her brother Jaime as well. She was using them as objects to fill the void left by the rejection of her father. And when Jaime left, she suffered severe abandonment issues, and that turned into anger, and I'm not sure about rage, but definitely anger that we saw expressed in this episode towards Jaime. And like I said, given that her father is an abusive sociopath, it's not difficult to see why she would be scrambled in the brain that way. And that's on top of the fact that she's engaged in an incestuous relationship with her brother. Now let me talk about Oberyn Martell. I really love the introduction of Oberyn into the mix, and the Martells more generally into the mix, but especially Oberyn. Because this is a dude you really don't want to fuck with. Especially if you're a Lannister. And not only that, I mean, not only is he just seems like a cool character, but he's the source of some much needed backstory concerning the antipathy between the Martells and the Lannisters. And I think that his character, especially with his like I said, his whole "you don't want to fuck with me" personality, especially if you're a Lannister, I think he adds an intriguing dimension to the political conflict or scheming or statecraft at King's Landing. Because, as we all know, the War of the Five Kings isn't just a military conflict. It's a political conflict in the sense that it encompasses political scheming and political statecraft. Basically, court intrigue. So Oberyn Martell's addition to this mix, I think, will add some very interesting and entertaining, a very interesting and entertaining dimension to this whole political mix. And I really wonder how Oberyn will continue to fit into all of this political scheming and court intrigue, because we know from the trailers that he fits in some way. But now I'm really interested now that I've gotten a little taste of his personality, and I wonder if he'll at all serve as some sort of obstacle to Tywin Lannister, because of course he hates the Lannisters, and if you're going to hate the Lannisters, you must hate Tywin Lannister, the patriarch of it all. So I wonder what kind of conflict will be there between Oberyn and Tywin. So now let me touch finally on Daenerys' storyline. She's now on her way to Meereen, which is the last of the cities in Slaver's Bay. And she's there to presumably free all of their slaves and make war on Meereen. And honestly, I must say that Daenerys is probably one of the most dangerous people in this entire series. She's really flying under the radar. She's the type of character who appears to be a source of hope and inspiration, but from where I stand, she's still very morally ambiguous. Especially because most of the time people forget that her whole goal, her whole purpose is to create an army so that she can go back to Westeros and wage war against them so that she can reclaim the Iron Throne. I mean, at the end of the day, she's pretty much in the role, which is somewhat ironic for a woman to be in this position, but she's really in the role of the warrior prophet. And this is why I say that she's such a dangerous character, because it's clear that she has some sort of messiah complex. It's just very clear. She's dangerous, very dangerous, because she has such a fanatical and zealous following. She can't even walk through the camps without people bowing their head, Misa, Misa, Misa. I mean, when someone is given that type of status, almost to the point where they are deified, then it becomes really easy to justify any action that they take. And in this sense, we can see that Daenerys is really a demagogue with a messiah complex. That's rather dangerous. Just putting that out there. And we can see this throughout all of her actions, and even in this episode where she just flat out states, the people of Meereen will do what I tell them or I'll kill them. And that's just the end of it. They don't want to do what I tell them, they die. End of story. So she's dangerous because of the fact that she has a messiah complex and she's a demagogue and she has a following of zealots and fanatics. But she's also dangerous because of those dragons. And as Jorah told her in this episode, the dragons can't be tamed. If you were under any impression that you can tame these beasts, because that's what the dragons are, they're just wild beasts, then you're mistaken. They can't be tamed. That's not going to happen. And if it's true that the dragons can't be tamed, not even by Daenerys, then what's the implication of that? The implication is that if you're in control, in possession of a weapon that is not just dangerous, but that could potentially be turned against you, well, then that's bad for everybody. It's bad for everybody you come into contact with. And not only that, but there was a very insightful quote from Jorah. I don't even remember what season this was in, but he said, if I remember the quote correctly, he said, there's a beast inside of every man that stirs when you put a sword in his hand. And Daenerys has a sword in her hand, and that sword are those dragons. Like I said, as far as I can tell, she's still very morally ambiguous, and I would not put my faith in her to be a source of inspiration and hope. Because knowing the type of writer that George R. R. Martin is, I would suggest that you not be seduced by that possibility. That's all I'm saying. And I wouldn't be surprised, given the fact that anybody in this series who even remotely comes into some sort of power, I mean, except for the gullible, naive, and stupid Ned Stark, except for him, pretty much everybody else just turns into a maniac when they get some sort of power. I mean, just pathological. Just immediately they turn pathological. So given the fact that everybody besides Ned Stark basically turns into a maniac when they get any sort of power, either military or political, I wouldn't be surprised to see Daenerys go down that same road. Just saying. So overall, I thought this was a pretty good opening episode. Like I said, I really liked Oberyn Martell's introduction into the series. I thought the interplay between Jaime and Cersei was done really well. And I think this was just a pretty good setup episode for what we can expect to see in the future. So, this was your boy, Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga. Just brought you another video with no frills, just the analysis. Peace and have a blessed day.